Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Charles E. Wilson, Professor of Business Administration, Harvard Business School, John QUELCH.
Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have slept very well.
This morning, we've got an outstanding panel that we're going to have address us on the issue of transforming financial institutions in Africa. And we're going to go in order. We only have, I think, 40 minutes for the panel, but I'm going to start straight away with Jaloul Ayed from Tunisia and Morocco. Jaloul is someone who's known to many of you, spent many years with Citibank and also in London, former Minister of Finance of Tunisia, and now also a official declared candidate for the presidency of the African Development Bank. So Jaloul, please give us a good start and a few insights from you on how to transform Africa's financial landscape.
Right, we're talking about the intra-African capital flows today, right?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Well, I think that the first thing I would say is that there is a new paradigm shaping up in Africa today, in that Africans are waking up to the tremendous potential that their continent offers. And we see tremendous movements taking place in Africa between north and south, east and west. Capital is flowing. It's still very modest, but the trends are there and tell us that an amazing story. I will mention 3 points that I think are important. The first one is that we have to distinguish the different types of capital flows. I will distinguish financial flows, meaning investments being made into financial markets that exist today, and there will be specific strategies to enhance those flows. The second one is the investments that are made through private equity and private equity funds. And I think this is very important because when you look at the fabric of the economies of Africa, you'll find that the bulk is composed of small and medium-sized enterprises, and we don't want to forget those enterprises because they really represent the real potential of the country moving forward. And the third one is industrial investments, what I call corporate investments. Okay. And we've talked about that yesterday, in that Africa today needs to invest in manufacturing industries, moving away from extracting industries into creating real values in their economies and investing in new industries that will produce the trickle-down effect, meaning given the possibility to average consumers in Africa to have access to goods that are out of reach today. The second point that I'd like to make is that we have to make sure that to align business interests or business opportunities with a social dimension. In other words, we don't want to, since we have the chance to shape Africa for the future, we don't want 1% of Africans holding 70% of the wealth of the continent. And I think we can do that. We can do what it takes to avoid that. And so the social dimension is extremely important. And the third point is what I call smart capital. Let me give you an example. By the year 2030, 50% of the African population will be living in urban areas. That will present some tremendous challenges for Africa. And by smart capital, I mean we can learn from the experiences of other countries. We can build smart cities, green cities, cities that will offer the best conditions for an environment that is safe, so that our cities will be clean. And I believe that having those basic principles in mind, we can make sure that the capital flows that will go within the continent will be used to smart use and efficient use, particularly for the populations of Africa.
Excellent. May I just follow up? If you take the first 3 buckets of investment that you referred to, where do you think we're making the most progress and where are the biggest obstacles?
We're making very good progress in facilitating capital flows between the different regions in Africa. We see some very important developments of banking, for example, between North Africa and West Africa. I can give you a few examples. The two largest banks in Morocco today are present extensively in West Africa. One of them is present in West Africa and in East Africa. What happened after those banks have created those networks in those countries is that investors, operators, have followed suit and are now making some significant investments in Africa. Let me give you an example. I was talking to the chairman of a large group in Morocco yesterday, and when I left Morocco in 2011 to go to Tunisia, we hardly spoke about Africa. And so I asked him yesterday, how many countries are you present today? And he said 12 countries. So between 2011 and now, he has operations in 12 countries. And that was facilitated by the fact that Moroccan banks have decided to expand into those countries, thus offering access to the business operators in Morocco into those countries. So the fact that the banking networks are expanding from north to south, from south to north, UBA, for example, is present today, which is a Nigerian bank, is present today in 16 countries. And we see the movement expanding into the future, and that will offer, I think, the best platform for different investors within the continent to expand into different countries.
All right. Thank you very much. Now let's move to Miguel Azevedo. Miguel is the head of investment banking for Africa for Citigroup. Your perspective, Miguel.
Thank you. Well, I'll make a point which is the following. Global institutional investors are long on capital, but they are short on growth opportunities. They want to find places where they can put the capital to work. If you look at Africa, I think you can say that Africa is short on capital and vis-a-vis the needs in the next few years, but is long on the growth opportunities. There are plenty of growth opportunities. So bringing these two worlds together must be a good business and must produce good results. And how do you do that? If you asked me this 2 years ago, I think the answer was you need to tour these investors, be them in the US or in Europe or in Asia, and explain about the Africa opportunity. The disposable income growth, the right demographics, urbanization, boom, boom, boom. Now, I actually think you don't need to do that anymore. People are aware of that. What you need now is to really offer them a platform where they can say, oh, this is the right platform for me to take advantage and transform the opportunity into an investment proposal, into an asset. And the way to do that is really to bring credible management teams with strong track record, with the right governance in terms of, when you go public, when you bring investors into your company, it's not your company anymore. So people need to understand that. And the right place to list your stock. Having a dual listing is a very credible option. Sometimes it helps because it adds additional credibility. And so I think this is what you need to do. But as always in life, it's very important to demonstrate that it works. And I think the good news is that, just to use the last 6 months, there has been at least 2 transactions where this happened, and those 2 transactions were very successful. And so success breeds success. And I think this is now a fact, and you have demand for Africa, but by having demand and successful transactions, you will also boost supply, i.e. you will convince investors to go to the international markets, to go through the scrutiny of the international markets, because the advantage, the net outcome is you get the capital you need to develop your company.
Okay. And what do you see as the biggest single obstacle at the moment to further investment? When you look at a portfolio of opportunities and separate the wheat from the chaff, What distinguishes the ones that are really good and the ones that don't make it?
I think is governance.
Governance.
Governance. I think attractive economic returns are abundant, easy to get, plenty to choose from. Having the right governance package and the right attitude vis-à-vis environment, safety, governance, CSR, corporate social responsibility, that's what makes the difference. And when you actually go on the road and meet investors, you spend so much time doing this, because this is the signal of sustainability of your business and your profitability.
Okay, super. Colin Coleman from Goldman Sachs, welcome back again this year. How do you see the investment climate?
Well, let me start this morning by firstly saying, right as we talk, President Zuma is being inaugurated live, and I stood down from attending his inauguration because the prospect of irritating Richard Atias is far more scary than the prospect of explaining to President Zuma that I was committed to this forum. So Richard, here I am for you. On the investing, and I think the specifics of this panel was inter-Africa investing. In other words, how is Africa investing in Africa, which is really an interesting question, because most people talk about China, most talk about the multinational corporations, the sovereign wealth funds, which is happening. But if you dig into that, I think the live deal flow in the world around Africa between Africans is very concentrated in the banking space, the telecommunications space, the infrastructure space, which is interesting. When I sort of try and disaggregate who are those people involved in these transactions, I would put private equity actually at the top of the list of people who are causing momentum for deal flow in Africa. The reason that we're seeing that is that there's been now a vintage of 10 years of private equity investing at least in Africa. And of course the dynamics of private equity is they invest, but they also have to exit. So they have to create liquidity events. So whether it's the likes of the Helioses, Actises, Abrages, who are buying and selling assets, they are creating momentum in deal flow, which is really interesting. The second is the development of consolidation, for example, in the towers, telecommunications towers space, which is an interesting development. And that in of itself is quite a significant opportunity, which is causing significant capital raises to take place. So if for those who are following the tower space, you will see that there's a significant amount of deals in which, for example, Goldman Sachs invested in one of the tower companies, and that is causing significant amounts of capital to be raised. The second area is the sovereign wealth funds are releasing capital, and there's consolidation of that. And thirdly, there's obviously corporates, the likes of Dangote Cement, Tiger Brands, Standard Bank, a variety of those companies who are investing. And as our friend from Tunisia said, a lot of it is happening within sub-regions, so West Africa or East Africa or South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. I would just sort of comment, of course, the South African companies are very strong, deep-rooted, well-capitalized, well-managed companies that are very active, actually, particularly in West Africa, but also in East Africa, whether it's in the insurance space, the banking space, the infrastructure space. And so we're seeing a lot of that more dynamic movement. And that is then complemented by the Chinese, the Indians, the Brazilians, and the multinationals. Many people here in the audience are, for the first time looking at investing in assets in Africa who wouldn't have been here 3 or 4 years ago. So I'm not sure if it's Richard's work attracting them, or it's the fundamentals of Africa. I'll go with the fundamentals of Africa, Richard, this time around. But the truth is, when we look at things, Africa is still coming off a low base, John, and what we need is we need to see much more accelerated economic growth, because at the moment Africa's development is still relatively immature, if I had to say. And you're going to ask me what the weakness is. The biggest weakness is institutional weakness. So within countries, the ability, particularly of governments, to drive transactions and to drive development of sectors like the power sector. That is going to be the biggest single development going forward for us to accelerate growth.
Super. Okay, let's go next to Jean-Louis EKRA. Jean-Louis is the chairman of Afreximbank from Egypt. Please.
Thank you, John. The first point I would like to make is that we've seen the emergence of larger groups, financial institutions, indigenous financial institutions in the continent. You take the EcoBank, the BGFIs, the Bank of Africa and the like, you are now seeing an emergence of larger groups. Those larger groups should be able to now handle larger deals. But unfortunately, they are still constrained by the fact that most of their funding is still relatively short-term. So there is some area of improvement there that one needs to address. Very recently, our institution was able to arrange the largest ever transaction arranged by an African financial institution. That was a $2 billion deal for Kenya Airways to purchase about 20 aircraft. We did it with many African banks, but we had also to partner with international banks. So I'm dreaming of the day where we could gather the savings from the pension funds and the like and be able to direct them in those kind of deals. The second thing that I would like to say here, there's still difficulties regarding financial flows due to regulation in our continent. That's because in so many countries, government is putting so much impediments to movement of flows. That's another area that I believe there is a need to address. Then the third point, since you are asking me 3 points, there could be hundreds for our continent, as you know. The third point I would like to make is regarding project financing. You see, if we are to transform African economies, it's essentially through projects that we are going to do that. But unfortunately, what we as bankers are seeing a lot of time are people coming with what they call projects, but which are at the very infant stage. They are actually what I normally would call ideas. So how do you move from those ideas or projects to actual transformation into something that we can see on the ground? Our continent has been exporting essentially raw commodities for the past 50 years. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that we need to change that. But how do you move from knowing something to being actually concrete? So there is some capacity building that is required from the African promoters so that they can transform those ideas into real projects.
And whose responsibility is it to build that capacity, do you think?
Well, certainly, I will tell you that it certainly will not be the banks who will be doing that, for a very simple reason. Banks want to make money. If you come to a banker with a project that is going to mature only in 2 or 3 years or 5 years, he's not going to listen to you. So let's try to mobilize institutions like the African Development Bank or the Development Financial Institution so that they could address it. Also, government has to come in.
Okay. All right, let's get a view from the Standard Chartered perspective now, if we may. Ebenezer ESSOKA is the Vice Chairman of Standard Chartered Bank of South Africa for Africa. Please.
Thank you, John. First of all, I think I remain extremely excited by this conversation of intra-Africa flows. 30 years ago, I started my journey in the financial services sector in the continent. And at the time, when we looked at trade flows or investment flows across the continent, you talked of Europe and North America. today, intra-Africa's flows are a reality. As acquirers, in terms of trade, in terms of volumes, Africa in 2005, and African companies accounted for approximately 50% of volumes. On deal values, they accounted for 38%. By 2011, deal values were north of 57%, and deal volumes 51%. The increase in deal values demonstrates that African companies are increasingly being involved in large ticket transactions. That is a plus, and congratulations to all who've been doing so. BGFI is an example of a bank that is doing it in partnership with Standard Chartered Bank. I can mention many of Standard Chartered companies, maybe I'll pick on one because this is made public in the Kigali 2 days ago, when Standard Chartered won the debt deal of the year with the Dangote petrochemical plant that they are putting up. These are real transactions. These are transformational transactions. What does the future hold? A positive story. I see this growing because we, as a financial institutions, have partnered with players from South Africa. Fast-moving consumer good companies, from the ShopRites to Pick and Pay, Tiger Brands, etc. My job for the 5 years has been to show South African corporates that there's life north of the Limpopo. And they have embraced it wholeheartedly. My job for going to South Africa, I was the CEO for Central and West Africa, was to demonstrate to Nigerian companies that beyond the visa challenges you might have, if you're bold and courageous, you will make money in South Africa. You can compete without a complex. That's point number one. Point number two is a belief from Africans that we can make a difference across our continent. You know, when I ask my son, what do you want to do? He would want to work for Goldman Sachs. He would want to work for Standard Chartered Bank. He doesn't know much about BGFI, which is a great financial institution. I think there's a question of awareness. We need to educate our children to understand that beyond the major financial institutions, you've got the Zeniths, you've got the UBAs, you've got the Standard Bank, you've got the Ned banks, and have that passion to work for these African institutions that are transforming experiences. Beyond that, think of being an executive of ShopRite, transform experiences across the continent. The future, I think, is extremely bright because we will tell the story. And the Standard Chartered success story is not unique. I'll give you an example. Ghana, 2001. Ghana had gone through a serious problem. There was a devaluation of the currency. My company is listed on the stock exchange of Ghana. We own, PLC owns 66%, and Ghanaians have invested to the tune of 34%. In 2001, I was managing the region. The stock price of Ghana dropped to $1.50 in 2001. By 2008, the stock price of Standard Chartered Bank Ghana was north of $38. The most satisfactory experience I have ever had as a professional in the continent over the past 30 years is when I walked off an AGM and one of my local shareholders looked at me, embraced me and said, "Thank you for making me feel like a wealthy man." Those experiences, passionate conversations, storytelling we should have to convince every single young, middle-aged African here, not those of us who have north of 50, to believe in that story. And if you do believe, we will transform the continent.
Okay, excellent. Let me just ask, if I may, in the boardroom at Standard Chartered, is there more conversation about Africa versus Asia from an investment portfolio allocation perspective these days? Are you finding Africa easier to sell in the global context in your own boardroom?
Well, over the past 10 years, I've been going to Asia, and I've been involved in several conversations. When the word Africa is mentioned, If you were sleeping, you are awake. People want to listen. That has been my experience. And in our boardrooms, we don't talk of Africa versus Asia. From a Standard Chartered perspective, we position ourselves as the most effective bridge between Asia and Africa. We capture trade and investment flows across Asia and Africa. The heartbeat of our business is in Asia. Our geographic focus is clearly defined: Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And we today, if you gave me a minute for publicity, we are the most effective bridge between Europe, Asia, Middle East, and Africa. So if you want to succeed in these corridors, you want to talk to me after this.
Okay. I think I gave you a very nice softball there, didn't I? Well, look, let's go to our next speaker. I'm delighted that we have with us on the panel Yves MAMFOUMBI, who is the budget director of the Republic of Gabon, and perhaps can tell us a little bit from the national Gabon perspective how he sees the transformation of the financial and budgeting landscape in Africa.
Merci. Répondre à cette préoccupation me renvoie.
First of all, I would like to say what is the objective of Gabon to want to transform their financial circuits. And first of all, I think we have to remember that Gabon has been involved in a very vast process, which is irreversible, to try to transform its economy. And this is in order to accompany the movement of the setting up of the strategic plan for an emerging Gabon. And of course, this will be concentrated on three different points: the financing of the investments, and these are long-term investments of structural programs, which of course are in phase with the national master plan in terms of the strategies of the infrastructures. And this will allow us to bring together the different economic poles of our economy. And this, of course, will allow us to boost the economic activity based on this. And of course, the piloting is being assured by the ANGT. And of course, we try to encourage investments in the different businesses and their portfolios so that we can bring more diversification to these portfolios, but also how we can somehow accompany the movement of transforming these different products right in our country. And there is a big French group, which Eramet, Comilog, who have been investing in the building of a metallurgical center in Mwanda. And of course, that is going to lead Gabon and allow us by the year 2016 to go from the simple extraction of the raw material to a first transformation of this raw material up to 20% of that material, and that is to say the manganese, to have a manganese metal and other products of manganese. And secondly, there's going to be the degree of attractiveness of foreign investors. And if we look at the potential of our natural resources, we will notice that we have a very big advantage in terms of a big Singapore group, which is called Olam, who have just invested in the agro-industrial group in order to try to take advantage of the potentials that we have, because they're one of the leaders in terms of palm oil. And also in the agro-industrial area, they're setting up an industrial economic zone. And this Singaporean group, again, is investing in this special economic zone together with the Gabonese government. And within the same process, we are now putting together a partnership with a Mauritian group in terms of the fishing sector. So what must we retain? Well, I think that today Gabon has a good experience, and we're successful in terms of the mobilizing of financial resources. And we, for instance, in last December 2013, we went into the international markets, and we actually carried out the up to $1.5 billion. And this, of course, was the first issuance of bonds for a sub-Saharan African country in terms of the development of its infrastructure. So this shows the vision of our country in terms of our strategic plan, but also the dynamic economic activity of our country. And so this proves that Gabon is really moving forth, and we can also see the concretization of this movement by having the beginning of the financing of the infrastructure. We have a sovereign fund, which is up to 10%, made up of 10% of the petroleum resources. And of course, within that fund, we also have the possibility of using those sovereign funds for the different infrastructural projects, which of course is part of our strategic plan, which is the Green Gabon, which of course concerns the agricultural development. And then we have the industrial Gabon, which of course concerns the fishing industry and other industries. And then of course a blue Gabon. And so all of this, in order to allow us to follow through with the very ambitious metallurgical programs that we are setting up, we have had the creation of a counter for the collection of gold. And since the development of this counter, we're going to be developing all the different artisanal level gold diggers into a different counter where they go through the governmental services. We've also created the Gabon Oil Company because we did want to allow us, in terms of the level of the government, to carry through and to accompany the private companies. And so we've developed this company, which has allowed us to actually get involved in the petroleum extraction activities and to play a much more important role in terms of the petroleum development of our country also. So I think this is important to mention this in terms of the development in Gabon.
On the bond issue, which I think was very impressive, can you tell us a little bit about where the bonds were placed? Which countries or which types of institutions were stepping up to take the bonds?
Yes, in fact, the bond market, which was what we did in December 2013, concerned mainly the different countries in the United States, in America, because we went through all the different stock exchanges, New York, Boston, and also England. And so we actually succeeded in getting good funds. And we had a Euro bond, and we had to reprofile this bond. And so we wanted to recontact the former investors. We had to motivate them to go ahead and to perhaps transfer a part of the bond investment that they had already taken up, and that they could invest in this new bond issuance that would allow for the development of the infrastructure in our country that is part of our strategic plan in terms of the director plan of our country.
Based distribution. Now, finally, one of the issues frequently mentioned in Africa is that of stock exchanges and the management and operation of those exchanges. So I'm very pleased that we have Rafael TUNG here, who is the president of the Securities and Exchange Commission of Central Africa. So Rafael, please, your perspective on the stock exchanges in particular.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Please allow me to also thank the organizers for having associated the financial markets in Central Africa with this debate. I would like to continue in what was being said by the preceding speaker concerning the mobilization of funds through the financial markets, in order to say that until the present time, we know that different investments in Africa were essentially financed by the different classical banks and the ones that you had mentioned before by the preceding speakers. But unfortunately, these banks no longer suffice for the development of our continent, and they have a fairly weak potential right now in order to meet all the different needs of the market, because when we look at the ratios of the different indicators today, we can clearly see that less than 10% of the banking system would actually come up to the expectations of the market. So we can understand very quickly that these banks are no longer sufficient in order to finance our economies. And so the financial markets, in one way or another, have to intervene. And in Africa, we realized that after about 10 years, the financial markets have been developing, because we had about 10 different financial markets in the 1990s, and today now we have about 20 different financial markets. And these different markets have provided for the mobilization of enormous amounts of funds, but of course, which is still not sufficient, because we have about $10 billion that has been mobilized by the different markets. And of course, the capitalization of the financial markets has gone from $200 billion to about $700 billion. And of course, these figures, which are very encouraging, of course, are still below what the needs are in the more developed financial markets. And so we have about 30% of the capitalization compared to the GDP for the sub-Saharan countries. And so we have lots of challenges that we still have to meet in terms of what was being said before in the panel. We have to improve the banking culture, the financial markets culture. We have to convince people to use those financial markets. We have to convince the companies to put their shares onto the financial markets here in Africa, and to go beyond the different classical sources of financing, because we can see now that here in Africa, we can see that in our own financial markets, we can allow our African companies to have a better visibility, a better operability of their different investments right here in Africa. And so I know that I don't have any time left, but I think I should insist upon the fact that right here in Central Africa, we are not on the sidelines anymore. In the 1990s, given the fact that there was a banking crisis in Central Africa, we thought that it might be necessary to create the stock exchange. And so now we have that stock exchange established right here in Libreville, which is why I'm here now. And we're controlling it. And we've been seeing pretty positive results in recent years. And we have about 300 billion CFA francs and capitals involved in our stock exchange. And the movement is continuing. We think it's a very good thing. But in any case, there is no reason, absolutely, to be pessimistic, because we're going in the right direction. We have a banking system which is quite solid. We have a single currency, which allows us to have transactions between the different economic communities. And we have pretty much succeeded our integration. And I would say that we have regulation of exchange rates, which, of course, is liberal. And it allows us not to have any problems with the exchange rate, because, of course, we're based on the euro in Europe. So I guess I'm being told that I don't have any time left. So I guess I'll have to stop here. Thank you very much. That's I don't have any time left. Thank you. I can answer any questions if you have any more.
Thank you very much indeed. Actually, it's not personal. It's the panel does not have any time left, so please don't take it personally. We have maybe a couple of minutes. Is there any panelist who would like to add something that you think we have not yet covered adequately, or which requires re-emphasis? Colin.
if I could just build on this question of the equity capital market, because I'm quite passionate about it. I would say we just have to be honest about this. The only capital market that is fully liquid, functioning, and deep is the South African capital market. It has an $800 billion market cap, trades $2 billion a day. The next biggest is Nigeria, with an $80 billion market cap. It trades $25 million a day, 1/100th of the JSE. So why I'm passionate about this is because when you look at China, for example, the reforms in China 30 years ago, we had a very similar situation, an illiquid small capital market in China. China used its companies, particularly the state-owned enterprise companies, as the vehicle to create liquid capital markets, and they reformed and modernized their capital markets in such a way they created a very liquid set of issuers that created larger capital markets in China, and today they have a very large liquid capital market, one of the largest in the world. We need in Africa to get a whole bunch more issuance out of the state-owned enterprise. If you look at Angola, Unitel, Sonangol, all of those type of companies. And I'm sure in Nigeria, South Africa, many companies that effectively are dormant from a capital market point of view that could create a far greater dynamism. We need Africans to own African companies. And we cannot do that if the equity capital markets are not functioning. So, congratulations to the Central African Exchange. But what you need is you need people to be issuing equity and to be getting far greater liquidity. And you need the companies and the governments to do it.
Yeah, excellent, Colin. Now, maybe I just turn to Jaloul for a final word. As a candidate for the African Development Bank presidency, have you heard anything this morning from the panel that helps you in your framing of an agenda for the ADB?
Well, I was very much interested to hear everybody. Obviously, in such a short time, there's only so much we can cover. But let me finish by saying this. The signs are clear. The trends are unmistakable. Africa is on the move. Intra-Africa capital flows have increased by about 32% on a cumulative basis since 2007, and I think that will continue. It is estimated today that there will be about $23 trillion of capital stock in Africa by the year 2030. That's a lot of money. And what we're debating today is how can that money go to the benefit of Africans? Yes. And that's why the real question is not so much our capacity to reach the full potential, because we will reach the full potential. The real question is how can we do it so that it will benefit all Africans? And so when we talk about capital, we have to make sure that we talk about equitable capital, sustainable capital, that we talk about smart capital. And just like Africa has shown its capacity to adopt new technologies, to create new technologies, and to export new technologies, I think we are quite capable to draw from the lessons of other countries, to build smart cities, and to abide by certain principles, all of us together, so that our Africa today will be in a much better shape when we leave it to our children and to our grandchildren. I think that is the real challenge. I think that those who are 20 years old, there aren't very many of them here, when they will reach the age of 30, they will be in a much more prosperous Africa. Mm-hmm. And I'm fairly sure of one thing, is that when we talk about Africa, we obviously talk about the different regions of Africa, and I'm fairly confident that with the new technologies, with the optical cables that are now going around Africa, with our capacity to exchange experiences, to transfer knowledge, and to share in our common objective to create values for our citizens throughout Africa, we will be able, quite frankly, to meet the challenges, because there are very many of them still there, and to set forth the right conditions for a much more prosperous Africa in the future.
All right, thank you very much, Jaloul. Please join me in thanking the panel. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome founder and chairman of the New York Forum Institute, Richard